It's actually a V8 block that has the rear two cylinders completely blocked off, and it's in a wagon. What else could you possibly ask for? America, please, I'm begging you, bring back wagons. 3 or 4 inches, so some people would say that's massive, others would say that's average, but neither here nor there. And that supercharger up front gives you a little whine. This is a car of all time. I know I said if I didn't have BMW, I would have a Lexus, but if I couldn't have a Lexus, this would be it. Alright, so starting this review, of course under the hood, I have to talk about this very unique V6 engine. Under the hood here, we have a 3-liter supercharged V6. However, that V6 comes with a caveat. Well, because in reality, this isn't a V6 at all. It's actually a V8 block that has the rear two cylinders completely blocked off to only make it a V6. Now I'll post some pictures of what that looks like now, but if you look at the back of the engine bay, you can see where Jaguar had blocked off the engine. It's super unique and so weird to see, and so that begs the question, why did JLR do this? On the flip side, BMW uses a modular engine system. Whether you want to power diesel or your petrol cars, they have anywhere ranging from a 3-cylinder all the way up to their V12. So if you see a BMW with a B engine, it probably has some variation of that block. Good example of this is the B58 versus the B48. For all intents and purposes, that's the exact same engine with just 2 cylinders chopped off. In any case, I digress. Let's talk about some power specifications. Seeing that this is a 3-liter supercharged dual overhead cam V6, this car puts out around 385 horsepower and 335 pound-feet of torque. And of course, the transmission mated to this engine is ZF's 8 HP. From the transmission, power is sent to all 4 wheels with a rear-wheel biased all-wheel drive system. Moving on from this model in particular, I want to talk about the segment of performance sedans, or in this case, performance wagons. It's really funny to say that out loud because when you think about it, there really aren't any left. If you want to talk about any performance wagon, you're really only talking about the BMW M5, Audi RS6, maybe if Mercedes brings back the E63 wagon, Porsche's Panamera Sport Turismo, and that's about it. But seeing that this car came out in 2018, there were a few more options at the time. BMW had the F31 wagon, Mercedes had their E400, Audi had a A4 and an A6 all-road, and I would say the direct competitor to this would be the Volvo V90, whether in the cross-country variation or the regular. I prefer the latter just because it looks a little bit more like a sport wagon. However, that one's not necessarily performance-oriented, that is a little bit more on the luxury side, especially when you talk about the fact that the V90 only has a inline 4. Yes, it's turbocharged, it's supercharged, and it has a hybrid system, which all puts out about 400 horsepower, but if you take out the hybrid system, it only puts out about 315 horsepower. And so that leads me to talking about rarity. This XF Sport wagon is kind of in a segment of its own. When talking about production numbers, Jaguar is never going to be on top of that list, but this car really takes the cake in terms of low volume production. From my research, what I could find is that there's only about 250 of these imported into the US. From that 250, you really only have 2 versions. You have the S and the First Edition. Digging a little deeper, it seems that Jaguar only made about 20 First Edition XF Sportbrakes, so that leaves about 230 in the S variant. From what the owner Andrew tells me, the S is the one you want to go for anyways, because they typically will have a little bit of extra power, better options, and some different specs in terms of color combinations. So on that note, let's close the bonnet and talk a little bit about the exterior. So now talking about the exterior of the car, I have to say this is my favorite angle of the car. If you couldn't see the front and I asked you what vehicle you thought this was, you might think it's an E91 M3 swap. While the rear arches of this car are by no means aggressive, they are just sculpted enough to make you think, maybe there's something a little bit sporty, something a little unique under that hood. And at least in this case, there is. So continuing on the outside and talking about the second generation, this is the XJ260. The original XF ranged from around, I want to say 2008 upwards of 2014. When 2015 rolled around, the XJ260 came out and had a refresh in 2020. And of course, talking about post-2020 Jaguar, we kind of have to address the elephant in the room. And that, of course, is talking about the controversy of the entire rebrand of the direction of the company that is Jaguar. Funnily enough, last night while I was configuring my own Jaguar, you can still order 2024 model years in 2026, so I thought that was something a little interesting. But getting back to the car, of course, this comes at a time when Jaguar, I genuinely think, was at its most recent peak. From about 2010 onwards, I think Jaguar had some of the best, most aggressive designs on the market, really only competing with Alfa Romeo's Giulia. And I don't even think that's a very controversial take. If you ask me, a BMW owner, the designs of the mid to late 2010s, BMW was doing some pretty subdued things. Take the F10 M5, my G12 7 Series. It wasn't really until the 2020s came around where BMW started to do more revolutionary rather than evolutionary. Take, for example, the G80 and the G82 M4. That made BMW enthusiasts everywhere absolutely lose their shit. What I don't think is batshit crazy is to think that this looks absolutely phenomenal. And it's in a wagon! What else could you possibly ask for? America, please, I'm begging you, bring back wagons. I cannot say it enough. I said it on the 5 Series wagon review. We need wagons here in the US again. We just don't get anything anymore. And has that blend of luxury and performance. It has the power to boot, it has the space to be practical, and it's fuel efficient. And more importantly, it's reliable. Outside of a couple of coolant lines that went brittle, the owner Andrew tells me that really the only thing that worries him are British electronics. He said really the only thing that's finicky is that sometimes the soft closed doors don't really want to soft close. As example here. In any case, while I understand that Jaguar doesn't have the best reputation for reliability and longevity, this example is a great case study when you have someone who loves, appreciates, and takes care of their cars, regardless of what the reputation is. I could name a billion BMW owners who have always had an issue because they've bought cars from people who have deferred maintenance. Now I'm gonna hop off my soapbox here. I could talk about reliability all day. The car looks great, it has a great power plant. What about the inside? Let's hop onto the interior and find out. Now on the interior of the XF Sportbrake, I want to start off by talking about the materials used. Jaguar's position of the XF in its model line is the mid-sized executive sedan. They have the XE, which is a little bit more compact, and the XJ, which is your full-sized limousine. Similar to BMW's 5 Series, Mercedes E-Class, and Volvo's V90. With those competitors in mind, I want to start by talking about the interior quality of the XF. When I think of Jaguar, my mind typically goes to coach-built, low-production, high-quality craftsmanship. I do think that mindset is very apparent when you look at the design language and the materials that they use in here. However, like most manufacturers nowadays, there are some areas where costs were cut and materials like hard-touch plastic on the glove box, here in the center console, and even the piano black in the touch points, it doesn't feel super premium. On top of that, the leather that they use is not very supple, I have to say, for a Jaguar in particular. Now, quickly referencing back to some of the competitors, the G35 series at the time had a ton of interior leather options, ranged anywhere from Sensatec fake vinyl leather all the way up to Nappa and Merino. And I bring up those two in particular because those feel a little bit better than the seats inside the Jaguar. The seats, while comfortable, alongside anywhere you rest your arms, like the interior and the armrest, are not necessarily the most supple when you compare it to Mercedes E-Class or even the G30 that I keep referencing. That's something that I feel like is a little bit lacking that I wish the XF had done better, especially for being something that's supposed to be more coach built, a little bit more customized. You would feel like the interior materials would be something that is the top priority. Moving through the interior, in front of me I have a fully digital gauge cluster, which at the time in 2018 was still pretty uncommon to see. The BMW G30 at the time had iDrive 7 Lite, which had a hybrid digital analog gauge cluster, along with the iDrive 7 Lite infotainment. For the infotainment, we actually have a touchscreen 10.5-inch display. This is the upgraded one over the base, which I believe was about 8 inches. It does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but it is only wired, not wireless. This was a little bit after the debacle with BMW charging people to use Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but I think that's something pretty interesting to talk about. Less than 10 years ago, we had to pay for Apple CarPlay. Now, seeing that this is a British designed and engineered vehicle, I think it's time to start talking about some of the fun quirks and features of this car. First of which is going to be your gear selector, which rises from the center console. When you start the vehicle, the gear selector rises from the center. It's an old relic of Ford's ownership of Jaguar that's been around since the mid to late 2000s. Now, the next quirky feature I want to talk about are going to be the vents, or in this case, the vent covers. When you turn on the car and turn the AC on, because it's a hot day here in Texas like usual, the vents will effortlessly rise up or rotate to show you the beautifully inscribed Jaguar on the slits of the vent fans. Something that is just ever so funny to me to see in a British car, but I guess it's to be expected considering they also have the rotating entertainment screen on the Land Rovers. And the last little quirk I want to talk about up front is going to be your glove box, or rather, lack thereof. In a wagon, something like this, you would expect that practicality and cargo space is something that you want to maximize. Well, I guess Jaguar engineers thought otherwise, because when you open up the armrest, this thing is barely deep enough for some chapstick. If I stand it up, it can't close. Even at its deepest point, it gets stuck hitting the top of the glove box. And so when I grab my phone to put it in the armrest, if I have anything that I want to plug in, I have to route it around the phone because otherwise it won't close. But I guess the cup holders sort of make up for that. I can put my phone here and still have it plugged in from under the armrest. Now, in terms of technology and safety features, this has everything that you expect from a 2018. The owner, Andrew, actually mentioned to me that in multiple occasions, Jaguar's cross-traffic collision warnings have saved him on a multitude of occasions where he would not have expected a late red light runner or someone who didn't stop at a all-way almost T-boned him. So for a brand that doesn't necessarily have the strongest reputation for electronics, it's pretty cool to hear stories like that where it actually saved his life. With that, let's move on to the back and talk a little bit more about practicality and some of the features you get in the second row. Now in the back of the XF, and with the driver's seat in my position, there's a pretty decent amount of space for what I would expect in this size sedan. I will say that there is tons of headroom. I have at least 3 or 4 inches, so some people would say that's massive, others would say that's average, but neither here nor there. What I will say is exceptionally comfortable though is the heated seats in the rear. I failed to mention that there are ventilated seats in the front, but seeing 4-corner heated seats is always something great to see, especially in a car with an original MSRP of around $80,000. Now, while we do have our own climate control down here, what I will say is a unique feature that Andrew mentioned to me is that when you adjust the speed back here, it actually adjusts the speed of the front. So rather than being a fully dedicated 4-zone or 3-zone climate control, it's really more like 2-zone where you can only control left to right temperatures and single speed inside the cabin. Not the greatest thing ever, considering again this is an $80,000 car, but seeing climate control in the back is great nonetheless. As you can see as well, we do have sunshades, which on a day like today is exceptionally helpful when recording in the 85-degree weather. We do have a very unique full-size moonroof. Moonroof meaning that the front does not tilt or open. It is a single piece of large glass. When you have it open though, it looks majestic. Driving this car around with the sunshade back makes the cockpit feel a little bit more open because it is a darker color combo with the black suede and the brown leather. Outside of that, in terms of amenities, it's pretty well spec'd back here. We do have a armrest here, but for some reason, it's much lower than what I was anticipating. When I put my left armrest down and then my right, I kind of have to tilt to the right. I don't know if that's because of the way I'm built or it's just part of the car, but I thought that was kind of interesting. From my understanding in terms of options, all of these sport brakes will have the upgraded Meridian speakers. That has a 17-channel speaker system with 825 watts of output. In comparing that sound system to something like BMW's Harman Kardon, which is the mid-tier upgrade, those usually will have anywhere from 400 to 600 watts, and this definitely sounds better than that. However, if you upgrade to Bowers & Wilkins, that sounds miles better than this with nearly double the output and a few extra speakers. So if sound systems are something that's important to you, Mercedes Burmeister and BMW's Bowers & Wilkins do pretty well for that. Lastly, before we move on to the trunk and cargo space, I want to talk about how lovely of a space it is in here. No matter where you sit inside this Jag, everything feels very high quality. If you've ever sat in something a little bit more low production, like say an Alfa Romeo or maybe even a Maserati, you'll hear a lot of reviewers talk about the panel gaps, the build quality, and rattles and squeaking. This car is very solid. Aside from these small amounts of hard touch plastics and lower quality plastics in the interior, it feels fantastic. I love the design language. I love the materials in here. It feels like a very premium quality space to be. So before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about practicality and look at that beautiful behind. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for, being in the back of this one of 250 Jaguar XF Sportbrake. The Sportbrake obviously means wagon, but in traditional sense, a Sportbrake usually had been reserved for a two-door hatchbacky style vehicle. Now, while yes, it is technically called a shooting brake and not a sport brake, I'll stop being an automotive historian and move on to the trunk. In terms of space back here, we have about 60 cubic feet of space, tons of room. I mean, again, I don't have the biggest wingspan, but sitting here almost inside the car anyways, and I can barely touch the back seats. If you want to put the back seats down, you just have to pull a couple of levers, and you don't even have to push them down. They go down all by themselves, mechanically, not automatically, but as soon as those are down, I mean, can you see how far that is? That is insane amounts of room. And so on that note, it's really tough for me to see the valid sides of the SUV argument when comparing SUVs versus wagons. We've had wagons for over 75 years. America's made them, Japan's made them, Australia had some, of course Europe did, and Europe continues to have a ton of wagons. If you go back to my G61 5 Series touring review I did back in March, I talked about where if it wasn't a diesel, it was a wagon. Europeans love wagons, and I can absolutely see why. You get the space and storage of an SUV, but in a sedan footprint. When you start to take size into consideration, you can see why a wagon wins in Europe. You have the size and storage of an SUV without having the SUV footprint. Europe as a whole might be the size of America, but when you start to break that up by countries and then by cities, it becomes extremely small. Even sedans in some of these smaller cities have a tough time finding parking. And so whittling it down more, that's why hatchbacks win out over sedans, because having this lift gate is extremely important for moving lots of stuff. Continuing throughout the trunk though, we don't have much else to chat about. I do have a 12-volt socket here in front of me, as well as a couple of hook and loops for your groceries. We do unfortunately not get the fold in and out tow hook, just due to US Department of Transportation. Again, if you saw my 5 Series video, that is my favorite feature that we just don't get here in America. Underneath this trunk mat here, we do have some railings, so if you want to add some inserts to block off your interior space, you can kind of compartmentalize it if you'd like. So outside of that, there isn't much else to talk about here. And I think it's with that we take this one of 250 XF Sportbrake out on the road. All right, driving the Jaguar XF. Now, I've already driven this on Lime Creek, which is our resident driving road, if you will. So I'll mostly be talking about the normal driving characteristics here in a normal commute and just general driving. If you really want to see the spirited driving, you can check out that POV in the link down below. So, talking about the driving characteristics, surprisingly, this feels like a 3 Series in a 5 Series body. It has that same sort of electric power steering feel of most modern cars, where it's too light, it's overly boosted when you put it in sport, but the linearity of it, the smoothness of that turning is really phenomenal. And especially when we took it to high speeds, spirited driving, it felt more like a sports sedan, a performance sedan. And that's a point that I want to focus on here. This is not a luxury car turned performance. This is, for my purposes, a performance luxury sedan. It does the performance first and then it does the luxury. The driving characteristics, even though it's on air ride in the back, are really planted. Again, in terms of modifications, we only have a brake upgrade up front and some spacers. That's it. They might be on different tires than stock, but they are the same sizes. So they probably came with some sort of run flat, but you know, being on 20s, it's tough to get a good ride quality out of that regardless. I mentioned earlier about the really silly gear selector, and so I just put it in sport mode. And I just gotta say, it's such a weird dial because as a BMW guy, I want to use it as an iDrive knob, but it's not. It's the gear selector, and so I put it back in drive gear because we're hitting a bunch of stops. It's just really funny to me. It's just so habitual to just want to keep switching it. But going back to driving experience, I want to talk about the seats. They are comfortable, like I mentioned. The leather, when it's cold, when it's normal temperatures and not freaking 90 degrees like it is right now in the dead of winter, it's very comfortable. Andrew bought this car cross country on a work trip, and you know, I'll save that for him to say the rest, but essentially got it for a steal and drove it halfway across the country from Charlotte back to Austin, and has had a wonderful 2 years with it. I cannot agree more that this is probably the perfect enthusiast daily. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's it. It's such a good car. You're getting great performance. You've got a supercharger instead of a turbocharger, so a little bit different. And it's a Jag. Again, it's something different that we don't see on the road nowadays. I love seeing an XJL Portfolio go down the road. I love seeing an XFR go down the road and absolutely rip it by me. They sound great, but this one doesn't. Without a valved exhaust, it really sucks the soul and fun. But again, that's something you can add on. Andrew mentions that the F-Type and F-Pace with the same engine have a valved exhaust, which you control here in the center, but for some reason they didn't do that with this one. Outside of that, in terms of MPGs, it's your typical about 20 combined, maybe 18 city and 27 highway. Andrew says he averages about 20 and gets about 400 miles to a tank of gas, so that's pretty good in my book. Now, I will say, as a wagon, this car is exceptionally low. It feels low even for a sports sedan, and so that's something that I was talking about with the owners. You know, does Andrew want to lower it at all? And he's like, no, you know, I don't want it to scrape. I don't want anything to happen to the lower of the bumper, and I totally agree with that. I think it's perfect the way it is. I wouldn't want to damage it, especially being a 1 of 250 car. And that actually leads me to my last point, and that is, should you get one? Yes, absolutely yes. These cars are pretty dang reliable nowadays. There's not too much that you have to do with them. The only problem is, where are you going to find one? The only cars that I can think of that remotely get close to this feeling, this driving experience, is a Volvo V90. But again, that only has a inline 4, and yes, it has 400 horsepower, but I don't know if it's an exciting 400 horsepower. A Jaguar is like saying, I have soul, I have spirit. It's that raw, visceral feeling that I mentioned the Audi S8 didn't have. And that supercharger up front gives you a little whine. 0 to 60 in 5 seconds is pretty dang good. It feels much faster, and I'm sure it is with proper tires and a good surface. It's so dynamic. That low center of gravity, it just makes you want to drive it. This is a driver's car. It's a driver's family car, is probably the more accurate sentence. But my God, does it make you feel something. And to see what this could do with the V8, and the Alcantara headliner, the ventilated seats, the Meridian sound system, it all comes together. Adaptive cruise, adaptive dampers. Oh, this is a car of all time, and I just can't believe that I got to drive it. And so with that, before I decide to buy this off of Andrew, if he ever let me, let's move on to thoughts and conclusions. And so, what do I think of the 2018 Jaguar XF Sportbrake? This is it. This is the car to have. You need to buy one if you can find one. Now, I understand there's more than 250 people in America. Import one. Find one in Europe, in Australia, in Japan. Whatever you do, you need to find one. This car is so fantastic. It is perfect. It's reliable. It's spacious. It's comfortable. It's performance oriented. The 6-piston brakes up front, while yes, are aftermarket, complete this car. I mean, the only thing this car needs, and Andrew and I agreed, is it needs an exhaust. This car needs to be the family man's F-Type. If this thing had a V8 in it, which it did in Europe, this thing would be perfect. It would be the best car ever. I know I said if I didn't have BMW, I would have a Lexus, but if I couldn't have a Lexus, this would be it. And I think it's with that, I want to say thank you so much to the owner, Andrew, for trusting me to drive your one of 250 car. This is definitely the rarest car that I've ever driven. I digress. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you want to check out some of our other reviews, like the 5 Series Diesel, you can check that playlist out up here. Otherwise, press subscribe right here to stay up to date on all of our new videos. As always, I'm your host, Donovan of Eurofever Garage, and until next time, see you guys later. Bye.